It all started during a live-streamed congressional oversight hearing. The tension in the room was palpable. The agenda was already heated: judicial transparency, political influence on the bench, and whether recent rulings were crossing lines meant to separate law from ideology. Chief Justice John Roberts had agreed to appear voluntarily, an unusual and rare occurrence that immediately drew national attention. Seated behind the witness table in his crisp black suit, Roberts gave the room his characteristic composed stare. But the moment Representative Jasmine Crockett took the mic, the air shifted. "Chief Justice," she began calmly, flipping through a thick binder, "there's been growing concern that the highest court in the land is operating more like a private club than a body accountable to the people." That struck a nerve. Roberts straightened, his jaw tightening. "Congresswoman, I will not sit here and have the integrity of this court questioned with political talking points." The room stiffened. Cameras zoomed in. Crockett didn't blink. She slowly closed her binder, leaned into her mic, and said in a tone colder than ice, "I'm not questioning the court's integrity, Mr. Chief Justice. I'm questioning your memory, because last term's rulings speak louder than your defense." The room went dead silent. Even Roberts seemed caught off guard. And within minutes, clips of that moment were flooding social media. The hearing room had turned into a battlefield of words and expressions, yet Representative Jasmine Crockett remained eerily calm, almost surgical in her delivery. Chief Justice Roberts, clearly not used to being challenged so directly in such a public setting, adjusted his glasses and tried to regain control. "I find your tone to be unnecessarily adversarial, Congresswoman," he said, voice steady but tight. "This is not a courtroom, and you are not a judge." Crockett gave a brief smile. "No, I'm not a judge," she replied, "I'm someone who actually has to answer to the people every 2 years. That kind of accountability tends to sharpen your view of the truth." A quiet gasp rippled across the chamber. Senators exchanged looks. Staffers stopped typing. Even the pages froze. Roberts blinked. Crockett didn't stop. "You see, Mr. Chief Justice, when a court begins issuing decisions that undercut voting rights, ignore precedent, and shield itself from scrutiny, all while accepting luxury gifts from political donors, we have every right to ask uncomfortable questions." Roberts opened his mouth, but she cut in before he could answer. "And if your only defense is being offended, maybe you've forgotten what real scrutiny feels like." The gallery erupted. Not with noise, they weren't allowed, but with movement. Reporters scribbled furiously. Phones buzzed. Staffers exchanged texts under desks. The clip hit Twitter within seconds. Hashtag Crockett vs. Roberts started trending by the end of the hour. By now, the hearing had become must-see TV. News networks cut into regular programming. Live streams on YouTube and TikTok drew hundreds of thousands. Headlines exploded: Crockett clashes with Roberts in unfiltered exchange, Chief Justice faces unprecedented fire from Congresswoman. Back in the chamber, the tension was escalating. Chief Justice Roberts leaned forward, this time choosing his words more carefully. "I understand the need for oversight," he said, "but painting this court as corrupt is reckless. You risk undermining trust in an institution vital to our democracy." Crockett tilted her head. "With all due respect, Chief Justice," she said slowly, "the American people aren't losing trust because of my words. They're losing trust because they watched the court overturn 50 years of precedent in one morning without public explanation, and then watched your justices vacation with billionaires who had business before the bench." Roberts flinched. "You can call it reckless," she continued, "but where I come from, we call it receipts." A quiet "doof" escaped from someone in the back of the room. Roberts, now visibly irritated, looked to Chairman Cartwright to intervene. "Mr. Chairman, I was led to believe this would be a respectful hearing, not a political ambush." Chairman Cartwright replied dryly, "Mr. Chief Justice, I believe Congresswoman Crockett still has the floor." Crockett's eyes never left Roberts. She was just getting started. The silence that followed felt like the breath before an explosion. Representative Crockett flipped open her binder again, this time revealing a page covered in highlighted footnotes. "Since you mentioned trust," she said, locking eyes with Roberts, "let's talk about what breaks it." She began reading. June 2023, Dobbs leak followed by refusal to investigate justices themselves. March 2024, Justice's spouse appears at political fundraiser. And May 2025, just 2 months ago, a luxury trip to St. Kitts paid for by someone whose company was part of an active Supreme Court decision. Roberts looked straight ahead, his hands folded tightly. Crockett closed the binder again with a soft thud. "You don't get to wrap yourself in robes and act insulted when we ask for answers. We're not your interns. We're not your clerks. We're elected by people who are tired of feeling like the rules don't apply to the powerful." The Chief Justice's face was unreadable, but his silence was louder than any objection. The room sat still, caught in the weight of what had just been said. Then Crockett delivered the final line of her time slot. "I don't expect you to like being challenged. I expect you to respect it. Because the people watching this? They're not judging me. They're judging you." And with that, she yielded her time. The gavel came down to mark the end of her segment, but the moment had already been immortalized. TikTok edits. Reaction videos. Hashtags exploding across social media. Hashtag respect the challenge, hashtag judging you. By the end of the hour, even cable hosts who rarely agreed on anything were saying the same thing. Crockett didn't just speak truth to power, she dismantled it. Backstage, aides scrambled to manage the fallout. Clips of Crockett's exchange with Chief Justice Roberts had already amassed millions of views. Late-night talk show writers were sharpening their monologues. Even political rivals, some reluctantly, acknowledged the Congresswoman's poise. Inside the chamber, Roberts shifted in his seat as the next speaker began. But his attention remained fixed on Crockett, who now sat calmly, thumbing through a notepad as if she hadn't just delivered the most viral moment of the year. Then came something no one expected. Chairman Cartwright leaned into his mic. "Before we proceed, I want to note for the record that Congresswoman Crockett's line of questioning, while direct, was well within the scope of this hearing." He glanced at Roberts. "And Chief Justice, this committee does not shy away from hard conversations. Neither should any public servant." Roberts gave a tight nod, but the message had landed. Later, during a recess, reporters swarmed Crockett in the hallway. "Congresswoman, were you trying to go viral?" one shouted. Crockett smiled faintly. "No," she said. "I was trying to remind a lifetime appointee that no one's above the truth." That quote hit every outlet within an hour. By nightfall, hashtags like hashtag lifetime but not untouchable and hashtag Crockett Clarity trended worldwide. And somewhere in the quiet corridors of the Supreme Court building, aides to Chief Justice Roberts were already drafting a carefully worded public statement. The pressure was mounting. And Jasmine Crockett? She hadn't said her last word yet. By the next morning, the hearing dominated headlines across every major network. Op-eds poured in from legal scholars, former judges, and political analysts, some defending Roberts, but many stunned by Crockett's surgical takedown. Cable hosts called it a generational moment. Back in D.C., Roberts returned to the court with a media frenzy following his every move. His clerks tried to shield him from the noise, but the damage was already done. Inside congressional offices, the buzz was relentless. Even senior members of both parties privately admitted they'd never seen someone confront a Chief Justice like that, calm, collected, and loaded with facts. That afternoon, Crockett appeared on the Sunday Roundtable, a high-profile political show. The host leaned in. "Congresswoman Crockett, critics say your tone was too aggressive for a Chief Justice. That you crossed a line." Crockett didn't flinch. "Crossed a line," she repeated. "The only line I crossed was between silence and accountability. And if that made someone uncomfortable, they should ask themselves why." The studio went still. Then she added, "The real story isn't that I asked tough questions. It's that we've gone so long without anyone doing it." The internet erupted again. Clips from the interview dominated platforms across the board. A photo of Crockett at the hearing, sitting back with her arms crossed, eyes locked on Roberts, became a viral meme titled "Unbothered Accountability." By evening, Justice Roberts released a carefully worded statement. While yesterday's hearing was unusually confrontational, I respect the role of Congress and the importance of public discourse. The court remains committed to judicial independence. It was polished, predictable, and for many, too little too late. The political aftershocks didn't stop. By midweek, congressional leaders began drafting a bipartisan proposal for a judicial code of ethics, something long discussed but never seriously advanced. Now, Crockett's moment had become the match that lit a long smoldering fire. Progressives praised her for breaking the silence. Independents called it a necessary confrontation. Even a few conservatives, albeit cautiously, admitted the public's demand for transparency was real. In a packed press conference outside the Capitol, Representative Crockett stood with fellow lawmakers, holding the newly proposed Judicial Accountability Act. "This isn't personal," she told the press. "This is structural. Because no one, not even a Chief Justice, should operate without a code of conduct." When asked whether she had any regrets about how she spoke to Roberts, she answered without hesitation, "I regret that it had to be said at all." Meanwhile, Roberts found himself in an unfamiliar position, defensive. Several justices, though silent publicly, were reportedly furious that his handling of the hearing had opened them up to criticism. Internally, tensions at the court began to simmer. The narrative was shifting fast. What began as a fiery exchange in a committee room had transformed into a national debate on judicial privilege, ethics, and public trust. News banners now read, "Crockett ignites movement for court reform, Roberts faces heat after viral hearing, one woman, one mic, national reckoning." Social media exploded with edited versions of the confrontation, some cinematic, others comical. But all shared one thing in common: they ended with Jasmine Crockett's ice-cold words, frozen on screen like a warning, "The people aren't judging me, they're judging you." Behind the marble walls of the Supreme Court, the mood had changed. What once felt untouchable now felt scrutinized. And while Chief Justice Roberts attempted to maintain his regular schedule, something was clearly different. His public appearances grew sparse. Private meetings became quieter, more calculated. Meanwhile, Crockett's momentum only grew stronger. She was invited to panels, roundtables, and university forums across the country. Law students cited her exchange in classroom discussions. Civics teachers played clips of the hearing to demonstrate checks and balances in action. One evening, during a town hall in Dallas, a young woman stood up to ask Crockett a question. "Weren't you scared? Challenging someone like that, in front of the entire country?" Crockett smiled. "I wasn't scared," she said. "Because I wasn't there to protect feelings. I was there to protect the people." Applause erupted. That quote became the headline the next morning. In private, multiple members of Congress admitted they'd received calls from constituents asking why no one had done what Crockett did sooner. The Judiciary Committee announced a new round of hearings focused solely on judicial conduct and transparency. And for the first time in over a decade, real movement was happening toward enacting ethical standards for the highest court. Chief Justice Roberts, once the symbol of serene authority, now carried the weight of that confrontation wherever he went. And though he never publicly referenced Crockett again, insiders confirmed something telling: he had requested that all justices be briefed on potential reforms coming out of Congress. He knew the storm wasn't over. In the weeks that followed, whispers turned into strategy. Behind closed doors, Roberts met with Senate leaders, attempting to quietly broker a compromise, hoping to soften the impact of what now seemed inevitable reform. But outside Washington's power circles, the public had already decided. Polls showed a historic drop in confidence in the Supreme Court. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett's approval rating skyrocketed, not just among her base, but across independents and younger voters who saw her as fearless, sharp, and unbought. Cable shows replayed the confrontation on loop, now calling it, the moment the curtain was pulled back. Late-night hosts joked that Roberts had learned not to interrupt someone with better receipts. Memes of Crockett's expression while listening to Roberts became a cultural symbol for holding the powerful to account. Then came the real kicker. A group of retired federal judges published an open letter titled, "It's Time," endorsing the Judicial Accountability Act. They cited Crockett's hearing moment directly, calling it a long overdue turning point. Chief Justice Roberts was blindsided. In an emergency session with his communications staff, one aide reportedly said, "This isn't just a bad news cycle. This is history reshaping around you." And they were right. Because on the next congressional session, the House scheduled the vote. And all eyes turned to the chamber once again. Would Roberts make a public plea? Would the court attempt to push back? Or had Crockett's words already sealed the deal? The House chamber was packed. Cameras rolled. Phones streamed. The gallery above was filled with reporters, law students, former clerks, and, notably, several justices sitting quietly in the back row. Chief Justice John Roberts was not among them. At the center of it all stood Representative Jasmine Crockett. She stepped to the podium one last time. "This vote isn't about politics," she began. "It's about principle. It's about whether we let silence guard power, or truth protect democracy." She held up the binder from the hearing, the same one she had closed with a thud weeks earlier. "This is filled with facts, rulings, and receipts. But more than that, it's filled with what the people have been screaming for, accountability." The chamber went still. Across the country, millions watched. Crockett looked out over the room. No institution, no matter how sacred, survives without the trust of the people it serves. And today, we begin rebuilding that trust, not with speeches, but with action. The vote was called. The Judicial Accountability Act passed. In a rare show of unity, it crossed party lines. Ethics rules were to be codified. Financial disclosures would be mandatory. And finally, the Supreme Court would have a transparent, enforceable code of conduct. Outside, crowds erupted in cheers. News anchors declared it a new era of judicial reform. Commentators credited Crockett for doing what generations of lawmakers wouldn't. That evening, in her office, Jasmine Crockett sat quietly by the window as the sun set behind the Capitol dome. Her team offered champagne, but she waved it off with a tired smile. "This wasn't a win," she said. "It was a beginning." Somewhere across town, Chief Justice Roberts watched the same sunset from his chambers, silent, contemplative. He hadn't been defeated. But he had been challenged. And the echo of her voice still lingered in the marble halls of justice. "The people aren't judging me, they're judging you." The next morning, front pages across America carried variations of the same headline: "Crockett forces change at the highest level, Roberts silenced, but the people spoke," and beneath those headlines, a single photo, Jasmine Crockett walking out of the Capitol steps, binder in hand, surrounded by young interns clapping quietly behind her. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't celebrating. She was focused. Back inside the Supreme Court building, the atmosphere had shifted for good. Though Chief Justice John Roberts issued no public comments that day, court observers noticed something unprecedented. Each justice received a sealed copy of the newly passed Judicial Accountability Act, hand-delivered by a bipartisan team from Congress. Later that week, Roberts released a formal letter acknowledging the act. "While this moment is uncharted for the court, the enduring strength of democracy lies in its willingness to evolve through challenge. I acknowledge the will of the legislature and the people." It wasn't an apology. But it was the closest the American public had ever seen from a Chief Justice who had just been publicly, and thoroughly, challenged. As for Crockett, she became more than a viral name. She became a national symbol. A guest lecturer at universities. A keynote speaker at law conferences. The subject of profiles in Time, The Atlantic, and Rolling Stone. She even turned down multiple book deals, saying, "I didn't come here to write history. I came here to rewrite the rules." When asked on a late-night show if she ever feared political consequences from confronting someone so powerful, she answered with a calm, steely grin, "I didn't go after the robes. I went after the silence behind them." The crowd erupted. And just like that, Crockett proved what few had dared to believe: even the most untouchable institutions aren't above a sharp question, a thick binder, and the unshakable voice of one woman who refused to blink.